Alright, so this is a double movie review slash comparison on the two documentaries about Woodstock 99. So that would be Peace, Love, and Rage, which is available on HBO Max, and Trainwreck, which is available on Netflix. And I'm definitely going to say which one I personally prefer, and I'm going to explain why. Um, but I'm gonna start out by just talking about like who was interviewed, how many people were interviewed, who was interviewed. Not necessarily give all the names, but just give sort of a basic how they went about telling the story and just do sort of some comparisons, and then I'll talk about which one I prefer and why, and yeah, just give some overall opinions. Um, but anyway, so there are five people who were interviewed in both. So one of them, Michael Lang, he was the guy who basically the organizer of the original Woodstock, or one of them, a major force, and he then organized Woodstock 94 and Woodstock 99 in the 90s. And for the two 90s Woodstocks, he was partnered with someone named John Scher. That was the second person who was interviewed. And then the third person interviewed was, I think his name is Joseph Griffo. He was the mayor of Rome, New York. That's the town that Woodstock 99 happened to take place in. Then the other two people interviewed were Jonathan Davies of Korn and Jewel, who were both performers. So, on the list of artists that were interviewed, besides Jonathan Davies of Korn and Jewel, HBO interviewed 6 performers, and Netflix interviewed 2, Gavin Rossdale of Bush and Fatboy Slim. And HBO also, so at Woodstock 99, there were actually 4 stages. There was the East Stage, the West Stage, which are kind of the big main stage. The East Stage was sort of the main stage. The West Stage was still pretty big, kind of more of a secondary stage, and then they also had the Emerging Artist Stage and the Rave Hangar. And so HBO interviewed a couple of artists from the West Stage. Netflix, nope. But Fatboy Slim was the headliner at the Rave Hangar. And so Moby, the HBO documentary seems to imply that he was a performer at the Rave Hangar. Wikipedia, when I last checked, seemed to claim that he performed as part of the Emerging Artist Stage. So Um, on the number of attendees that were interviewed, so HBO, I counted 7, like, basically concert goers who were interviewed, and Netflix, only 4. Um, and so, um, when it came to staff and people who worked there, HBO interviewed an EMT and someone on the security team. Netflix, there was a paramedic, a few people on the security team, the guy who ran the Rave Hangar, the guy who ran the pay-per-view television, a whole bunch of people on the production crew, like the head of security, like one of the lab technicians, just a long list of people. And so, when getting to public commentators who attended, HBO, I don't think they did a sit down interview with him. I think he recorded some statements that he sent over to them because there was some voiceovers from him. Rob Sheffield, I think of Rolling Stone magazine, and for Netflix, ABC News reporter David Blaustein. I think that's how it's pronounced. And with there were some MTV VJs. So with HBO, there was voiceover commentary from Carson Daly. I think he probably just made a recording, made some statements, and sent a tape in. But they did a full interview with another MTV VJ, Dave Holmes. Netflix interviewed Ananda Lewis, and they also interviewed one of their producers, Tim Healy. There were definitely some others that Netflix interviewed. The main narration from HBO was three journalists: Maureen Callahan, Stephen Hayden, and Wesley Morris. And these, I don't think they were there. They were basically journalists and critics who, like, their job is to comment on these sort of things. Now, the number of artists that were talked about in the documentaries. So with Netflix, it's kind of easy to count up, like the ones where you get this big, it has their name and then like zooms in. There's this big caption of each artist and like their time of their performance. So I counted 12. Plus there was another artist that was mentioned a couple of times in passing with their photo shown, and another one where they showed a clip of him being interviewed by MTV News. With HBO, kind of figuring out the count is a little different, but I counted like about 20 or so, maybe a little bit more, maybe 23 at most. On the percentage of all the artists who performed, like I think there were 25 artists that performed on the East stage. So, and then on the combination of the East and West stage, maybe about 50 or so. Then all four stages combined is like, I don't know, somewhere between 80, 90, 100, maybe more. But a lot. So, percentage-wise, neither documentary even touches on all the people that performed. Like, it's a big number. But I guess when comparing sort of how they approach the story, HBO, like as I said, it's mostly a lot of the interview footage used that they did was from like three journalists who weren't necessarily there themselves. So it's a lot of it is mostly focused on the cultural framework in which Woodstock 99 took place, sort of giving a lot of talk about sort of the cultural context, the mindset in which the people attending were in. And it talked maybe more about the audience experience. And, like, yeah, it brought up and mentioned a lot more artists who performed. Still very few on the grand scheme of things. And it basically, these journalists and some of the others interviewed gave a lot of basically their insight and opinions and their commentary on like the culture and the event and all sorts of things. Netflix focused much more on the production team. A lot of talk from the production team. A lot more the behind the scenes. Like HBO doesn't even touch on like the behind the scenes stories. Basically, it's a lot more like the organizational process of putting it together. A lot of the stuff a lot of the stories from the crew, a lot of the like things that were happening in the office, a lot of the different things they did. Um, yeah, when tallying the number of people that were interviewed, I counted 25 people interviewed for HBO and 31 people interviewed for Netflix. Um, but I'm gonna now. Yeah. They needed more water at Woodstock 99. But I'm gonna now give sort of my personal opinion on which one I prefer. So what I'm gonna first say is both of them are pretty good for what they do. I think they both do a great job. They both tell the story as they want to tell it. But between the two, I definitely prefer Netflix. Um, but there are definitely some things that Netflix does not mention, like on some of the things that happen to women, like the EMT that was interviewed had a much more brutal and harsh story that really shows just how terrible they were. Um, it's basically um, one of the journalists interviewed mentioned someone having coming forward to her about giving a really upsetting story, and basically addressing why women didn't report, and basically saying it's like what was there was probably a lot more that went on than what was reported. And it also mentions someone who put together a kind of a anonymous website where people can anonymously come forward and tell their stories, um, and a lot of them blaming themselves. Um, Netflix talks about like a lot of the groping throughout. It gives sort of a graphic description of what one of the people witnessed during it, but then like when talking about the number and a lot of the behavior and really commenting on that, it saves it for the end after the event happened. Then it was in the aftermath where the organizers found out about any of that, where there's a story of a mother calling the office and saying what happened to her daughter. So one of the other things that HBO touches on that Netflix doesn't is it touches on the attendee who died. There was an attendee who died. He got hyperthermia. They didn't have the resources to treat him because they weren't prepared. And they should have been. So I think another thing that just one clip that HBO included that Netflix didn't include was a guy just breaking down part of the place like early on Sunday morning, I think, and he was basically saying, "Oh, I'm just doing it for fun." So one of the other things is HBO sort of emphasizes more the sort of the tough macho dude bro culture, and Netflix really focuses much more on John Scher's focus on profit. But also, I am going to say that Netflix, it does bring up sort of that tough guy culture. It it touches on it more briefly, but definitely enough for you to remember it throughout the whole thing, for you to notice it. And so, yeah, I definitely prefer Netflix. Also, one of the things I've sometimes been doing has been watching the Netflix one back to back, right afterwards watching the extended director's cut of the original Woodstock. And I think that's, yeah, for me, one of the cool things is I think, like, I'll say that if you're gonna watch one of these documentaries back to back with the original Woodstock, Netflix is probably a better one to watch back to back with the two. HBO ends by bringing up how Coachella happened shortly afterwards, and talking about how after all this time, Coachella, sort of the capitalistic aspect of Coachella has kind of become a little more obvious, but it's not done in a way that's gonna really mistreat the crowd. You might say it's and also one of the things is with both documentaries, Michael Lang gets the last word. At the end of the HBO one, well, he addresses the question of possibly organizing another Woodstock, and he basically says never say never. And then it kind of gives a brief epilogue talking about, like, just with captions, basically talking about, like, Coachella, then talking about how there was an attempt at a Woodstock 2019, but that fell through. And then there's it also re-mentions, like, the reports of sexual assaults that happened. Yeah, the end of the Netflix one, Michael Lang basically says the original Woodstock is always, it was this iconic moment and it's always going to be there, and asks the question, did Woodstock 99 damage it? And he then says, maybe a little bit. And then it ends where he thanks the camera person and walks off. And then there's a caption saying that 3 months after the filming of that interview, he passed away, that there are no plans for a future Woodstock. And yeah, for me, it's like seeing this big disaster. It's then kind of like, now let's see the original Woodstock where things went well. HBO's probably, I haven't watched HBO back to back with the original Woodstock, but one of the things about the HBO documentary is it comments that the original Woodstock was maybe not necessarily as wonderful as people make it out to be. It was that the movie kind of romanticized it. I'm going to express some of my disagreement with that. And where I disagree and how I disagree is, A, the original Woodstock did not end with the crowd burning the entire place down. There was a group of people that did burn down food booths. Also, that is mentioned in the movie. At least one of them. It's mentioned that someone had his burger stand burned down, and also one of the other things mentioned in the movie, the original Woodstock, was an announcement at the original Woodstock about these tabs of brown acid, basically saying, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but those tabs are not that good, so I'm not going to tell you what to do, but just be warned if you're gonna try them. So, yeah, one of the things that I also really like about the Netflix one is it also shows one of the people who was on the production team for Woodstock 99 was someone who had been a major part of the original Woodstock with, like, giving people free food. And so, like, Saturday morning, she sees all the trash. She goes to get a bunch of trash bags and tries handing them out. Like, being used to, like, at the original Woodstock, like, a lot of people, like, contributed and helped out. It was sort of more of a community thing. And so it's like, when handing out the trash bags, the reaction was not what she expected. Let's just say that. Yeah, I'll say that in opinion that I kind of disliked from that I kind of disagreed with from someone in the Netflix documentary when mentioning like Korn, Limp Bizkit, and Rage Against the Machine, and it basically said like I was trying to warn these organizers that like these bands are really rage filled. This is not like the peace and love of the original Woodstock. I was like, you know, Rage Against the Machine, I feel very much stood for the same ideals that the hippies stood for. Um, but looking at it now, it's like, well, within that cultural context, maybe their message went in one ear and out the other. It was like the heavy sound and like occasionally some words, but people were just kind of only hearing some of the words and like, F you, I won't do what you tell me. They absolutely heard that, but they didn't hear some of those that work forces are the same that burn crosses. That went in one ear and out the other. But yeah, I very much, but I definitely feel if you're someone who is interested in learning about Woodstock 99, I very much feel that both documentaries are definitely good viewings. And they both give different approaches to the story. But also one of the other things I feel about Netflix is a lot of the opinions expressed by the journalists are also expressed by people who were there in the Netflix documentary. So a lot of the stuff that basically the journalists just sort of talk on and on more about are still addressed. That's another thing. But yeah, but overall, there are some stories that are not included in one but included in the other, and vice versa. And yeah, it's just good to hear different opinions. But yeah, thank you for watching. Peace and love.